They'll be calling you a radical. Before I start reading this chapter 4, I want to remind people, this is my socioeconomic, artistic, mind-thinking, crack it, break it, start it over movement. And in order for any movement, socially, artistically, philosophically, which I encompass all this, it's like a trial attorney. We have to lay the foundation first. And if you people get offended about, let's get real, my YouTube site, this book, I talk about things people don't want to talk. I talk about sexual content in the reality of it. As we have been so postured and groomed over the last 40 years to not speak of certain things. And if you don't fucking like it, I don't really give a fuck, because you baby boomers are fucked up anyway. This really, hopefully, will be read by a lot of young people at some point. And, you know, I'm to the point the baby boomers too fucking far gone. As I get people all the time say, fuck, what's the point? You know, it's, yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I look around, I travel around, I look at these fucking people. Talk to them. I mean, it's unbelievable. But it won't stay that. All us baby boomers will be fucking dead one day, and the post-ignorance generation will take over. And they're not going to be pathetic more. Well, they couldn't. It's impossible to be as fucking stupid as this generation is. But I need to lay the foundation. There's a lot of fucking things, truths, isms that writers aren't going to talk about. Contemporary fucking whatever fucks ain't going to talk about. I am. I have to lay the foundation. That's what this book is. That's what this book is. This book will never be in paperback. Never. White Collar Crime Becomes Our Economy, Chapter 4. Which, by the way, this might be my favorite. I don't know. I say that every fall of these chapters. Well, 2 years later, the Ponzi was up. Our pathetic Ogden media had been called dozens of times by disgruntled investors and did nothing. It was not until the Weber County prosecutor went after him, Sal Southwick, the Mormon Madoff, that the Standard Exaggerator, our paper, reported anything. One of the worst papers in America, just my opinion. KSL, who was owned and founded by the Mormon Church, jumped on it. By the way, they are a very good organization. Do not stereotype them. They do great work for the most part. Remember, I wrote this in 2010, the fall of 2010. I got a new beef going with KSLs. They refused to report that Mike Lee, do as I say, not as I act, Mike Lee, the teabagger, down $900,000. They refused to report that his house got foreclosed on, or that he's a giant pathetic liar. They refused to report on Dewey McKay, the doctor shopper who murdered the ATK scientist, who went to prison for it, as our congressman right here, no one knows who he is, Rob Bishop. Rob Bishop. He hides in the basement. We live in this county I live in, could be the dumbest people on the face of the earth. And that's no exaggeration. That is documented. People don't even know who he is. He testified for, during and after, for a convicted mass murderer who wrote 3.9 oxycodone. But he's a good Mormon, so KSL, so caveat that statement. The stories came out, 150 million gone. I told Randy, my attorney, I told Mike, our dean, I did not think there was $100 million left in this area. I ran into a church leader of Southwick's investors shortly thereafter. He said, you do know how he's pulling it off? I said, yeah, like they all do, religion. He said he would have them meet at the Mormon temple in Ogden, which you have to have a temple recommend to get in. I don't get in, but get this. Oh, actually, I won't tell you that. The Mormons will get mad at me. I've been all through that Salt Lake temple. Shh. He said, well, I said, yeah, like all they do, all of them, religion. He said he would have them meet at the Ogden Mormon temple, which you have to have a temple recommend to get in. And they would pray and make a contract with God. I did not surprise me one bit. What did surprise me is the fact this was going on all over the country. Religion and crazy Madoff talk. Again, using religion as a weapon. This was not Utah and the Mormons. This was religion in the United States from A to Z. The word hedge fund was thrown around by every scammer in the world. A hedge fund, a true hedge fund, is just what the word means. Hedging a fund. A fund, a mutual fund as we call them. The using of a derivative in order to hedge risk. That is how the hedge fund was born decades ago. The modern day hedge fund over the past few decades has very little to do with hedging at all. What many were calling themselves as per hedge fund We're no more a hedge fund than British Petroleum or environmentalists. A true hedge fund takes expertise and very sophisticated knowledge of how to hedge risk with derivatives while still getting reasonable returns on investment. Bottom line, it takes hard work, and knowledge. Learn knowledge. It was easy to call oneself a hedge fund over the past decade. The term had become a metaphor of skill and knowledge, which in its real form is a true metaphor. Hedge funds using computers or people as portrayed in casinos are not hedge funds. They are trading funds or growth funds or whatever scam instrument you want to call them. A true hedge fund is a wonderful way to keep wealth and grow wealth. They are the only way to fly. They work big time. Now finding a true hedge fund, that is another matter. A true hedge fund is hard to get your thumb on. Great hedge funds, large well-run hedge funds, have no need to shop for customers. They find them. Try to. Of course, there are guys like Bernie Madoff who manipulate the very concept. In the case of Madoff, everyone with any knowledge at all knew that his strategies were a scam. It was common knowledge among true hedge funds, but there's not that many true hedge funds out there. There are thousands of fake hedge funds. In order to do what Madoff was claimed to do, it's possible at its limits. Do not think a good hedge fund cannot guarantee a good rate of return. They can, but only up to the smaller size. Look, if you find a very high dividend yielding stock and roll the derivative properly under the equity, you can guarantee the return. But the rolling the proper ways and method is very sophisticated and takes talent. Then there is the size again. There are only so many derivatives written, and in many cases there are not as many as people may think. And let's not forget that rolling a derivative in larger and larger size will defeat the whole game. It will put pressure on the derivative pricing regardless of the individual VIX. The volatility premium built into the derivative price. I know the VIX is an index. So all of this so-called hedge fund, if 10% of the hedge funds calling themselves hedge funds over the last decade were hedge funds, we would have to increase the CBOE floor to the size of a small state. They are hype and bullshit like almost everything else in America anymore. Remember this. Dig deep and understand where your money is and who has it. My point is this. My example I used in the context of ignorance and dishonesty, but much larger than the said dishonesty we have all understood our entire lives. This is a premeditated empowerment. The scammers were not afraid anymore. They had a higher power. No, not God. The United States powers at the time. The presidency. Look, every scammer in the world with a lazy cheat the system attitude was in business and had a job to do. Fuck everyone and everybody they could. Friends, family, church brothers and sisters. They knew they were right the whole time. Fuck learning to train. That is hard work. Fuck finishing college. That is hard work. Fuck reading a book. That is hard work. I get my fuel from a 10-second soundbite, and I can grandstand without knowledge all I want. I have a leader. The reason it was possible was the ability for everyone to justify anything. They could use their lazy, scammy minds and just justify it by any means. Why not? W did it. Fox did it. The greatest lie in American history was justified by the Supreme Court itself. Time to set up shop. What, no usury laws at all? I could sell a piece of shit car worth $1,000 at best for $340 a month for 5 years at 32% interest? No bank will ever back that scam. It is immoral, and there are too many. What, I got the loan? How much inventory can I buy? Unlimited millions? It was on. Loan sharks with neat hair that attended church regularly had the world at their hands. It was like when a pedophile would read a newspaper in 1885 and would Mormons marry and have sex with 12-year-olds? 40-year-old men can have more than one 12-year-old? Wow, talk about the light going on. And if you think I'm crazy on that one, you know nothing about Utah history. My great-grandmother died in childbirth on her 5th child at the age of 19. By the way, she was a beautiful woman. My great-great-grandfather went to the house when she was 13, he 19, to take her on a date and never brought her back. And remember, this went on a lot of places in the United States, not just here. We're talking, 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. The above comments are not a slam on the Mormon Church. It is a slam on the individuals who use religion as a weapon and their sex. It makes me sick. I have a great deal of respect for the Mormon Church, as I do for all religions for that matter. The Mormon Church does a lot of very good things. I do disagree with them getting involved in the Proposition 8 battle. I believe that battle is no place for religious organizations flew the balance box, or any for that matter. They should all lose their tax status because they all preach from the pulpit. Every freaking church in this country, evangelicals, they're worse than the freaking Mormons. All of them, the Catholic, then during that war, they preach from the pulpit. It's against the law. Take their freaking tax status away. That creep Karl Rove, that liar. But then definitely they have the right to organize the people to their voice and opinion. It's called the First Amendment, and the 5 elements said so. I would never talk badly about any religious theology or organization, but I surely will members of an organization or religion who use the religion as a weapon like many leading up and during the Iraq War did. Religion is a very personal place for everyone, and that is where it belongs, in your soul, not in a bomb or your sex. Every scammer was put into motion by the blowjob. If the blowjob does not come forward, Gore wins. If Gore wins, no Iraq. If no Iraq, no debt. If no debt, money for education and roads. Money for education and roads means more jobs. The one that is the most glaring in this thesis of mine is Iraq and Afghanistan. Look, George H. Bush did not invade Iraq. Clinton had no intentions of invading Iraq. And there is no doubt in my mind that Gore would not have gone into Iraq. Many I have discussed this will say, well, what about September? I like to use a different name than that date. I know 3 people whose birthday is on that day, and for the 900,000 Americans born on that date, I call it the modern Mountain Meadow Massacre. Yes, that was on September 11th, 1857, and it had all to do with religious paranoia, just like this one did. The 19 creeps were Saudi, 16 of them none from Iraq. The letting Saudi Arabia off the hook was, again, set in place by the blowjob. Remember, this was George Bush, and he had a very close relationship with the Saudi prince. He does call him Brother Bandar. I am no conspiracy theorist, but I sure see where they get their fuel. I truly believe Gore would have made Saudi Arabia pay the price, or probably would have never happened. Bin Bin the creep, who we with a wink and a nod don't know where he is in Saudi, is a Saudi. His family made a fortune as his personal builders of the kingdom. Remember, as the building of Saudi Arabia in the early 80s. Remember, I wrote this in the fall of 2010. I had many friends who went there and made a boatload of money. Also remember why it is called Saudi Arabia and not Arabia. The Saudi family took it over by force. For years, name me the 2 societies that are the most repressed on earth. And no, not the United States, but a close third. Or Western journals, none are allowed in. North Korea, and yes, Saudi Arabia. Remember when Bin Bin's brother and the Saudis tried to give New York the big check, and Hillary told them to take the check and stick it up their ass? They were Saudis. Otto was an Egyptian. It was his baby. It was his plan. He was flying one of the planes. Watch the Frontline documentary on Otto. It has been out for years. Also watch the NSA documentary by Frontline. They give out Bin Bin's phone number. They had it. 5 of the 19 stayed right next to NSA headquarters in Lower Maryland the night before the attacks. The Frontline Genius reporter says it is one of the greatest ironies of all time. He is so right. Again, it is all rooted in neo-ignorance. Look, it is like this. When we had the popular opinion support to go into Korea because of Japan, by the way, why my father was drafted, an atomic veteran, it was rooted in the race ignorance. Koreans, Vietnamese, and Japs, they are all the same people. They look alike. Again, in the case of the September creeps, Saudis and Iraqis and all Middle Easterns look alike. They must be all the same. It is equivalent to saying all Europeans are a shade of white. They're all the same, and do not kid yourself, the average American has no clue the difference between France to Sweden, not in language, a map, or any cultural or historical perspective. I have the proof. Hell, the majority of Americans cannot tell you where Minnesota or California or Kentucky is, or name the one Supreme Court justice, let alone tell you the difference between Saudi Arabia or Iraq or France or the next state over, from where they live on a map, for that matter. Do not kid yourself. When you watch Jay Leno do his jaywalk, All-Stars, that he's not just using a bunch of stupid subset handpicked for entertainment reasons, reasoning few. That is a mainstream popular opinion neo-ignorant American. And do not think all our Europeans are out of this equation. They are not. I do not fall for the Europeans nations are all the same. Remember this, all of you in the UK, many of you went hand in hand along with W. The ones who supported Tony is as much to fault as anyone, your special relationship. Wow. And to the rest of you so-called smart Europeans in France or Germany or Denmark or Sweden, or any of you, we are all not morons in the United States, just most of us. They are plain neo-ignorant. I recently did a study for this book with my flip camera on a university campus, 2,000 interviews with 2 questions. First, what is your opinion of Congress? Verbatim, blah, 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 I hate them. Second question, who is your congressman or woman? Dad, drool, more babbling. Less than 5% got it right. The last 2 interviews I have, one is with a university professor who did not know. Second to the last interview with a homeless man, he knew. That is a future chapter in this study of my compare and contrast and supporting theory of homeless people over the past decade are today, right here, right now, much better than the average American. I can and will prove it in this book, Homeless, Happy, or Happy, future chapter. I later told the professor that the homeless man knew the answer and he did not. He said, how would he know? He does not even have a television. I said, you just answered that in the context of the entire study of mine. Have you ever heard of a newspaper? I know he wanted to throw a punch. He did not have the balls. He was a fucking moron anyway. He stormed off. And no, not Iraq, who paid a gargantuous price for something that had nothing to do with. Again, you can call me Freudian, but I believe the invasion of Iraq was nothing more than a saw-sex attitude of George W. It was nothing more than a pissing contest with Saddam. My dad can whip your dad. I will show you. I honestly believe that's all it was. And think about this one. It all comes full circle. Without the blowjob, there is no Iraq. With no Iraq, Hillary wins easily. The reason Hillary lost her vote on Iraq, lost the election, was her vote on Iraq, including mine. That is the reason I voted for Obama and not Hillary. I can honestly say that. Look, look, doesn't say she was a victim twice. Bill Clinton had 6 with other females for decades. Hillary knew, she stayed. It is like a business philosophy professor, Sandra Powell, would detail in her class. She would say, let's have a vote and your partner keeps cheating on you. Whose fault is it? Of course, the majority would say the other partner. She would then go into a full lecture on why it is important in business to understand is the one who is allowing it to happen. I think of that great professor. I had that great, and all the great lectures I had. That one of hers has got to be one of the best. In September of 2001, I was going through a very ugly time in my life. I was going through a very ugly divorce. My father had suddenly died, and I lost my Wall Street job. I was living in my big house by myself, laying on the couch, watching the pre-market like I have done for decades. I was trading derivatives on my own and for a hedge fund on contract. I, like everyone else, remember the exact moment CNBC where I was. CNBC, before they went neo-ignorant crazy, came across the news. I was helping Dr. Madsen teach Clyde Cooley's finance classes. We at Weber State had 12 students in New York and an apprentice program. I knew that all the brokerage houses were in the towers. I had worked there. I jumped in my truck and flew up to Weber State. I was there within 1 hour of the attacks. When I got there, all the computer ladders were yellow taped off the buildings. We had Saudi students working in the labs. I asked her secretary what was going on. She said, they're gathering hard drives. What about the students, she asked me. She knew I would know. I told her all the brokerage houses' office are in the towers. But I did know they had their own evacuation plan, each firm, because of the 1993 attacks. Little did I know that we did have one student killed, but he was at the Pentagon. I knew him very well. He was a very good student. I look back on fate. I had turned down a position on April 28th of 2001 that would have placed my office and place of business at the towers. I did know that all the Wall Street firms had their own evacuation plans that had nothing to do with the towers because of the 1993 attacks. They were smart. They did not just evacuate everyone. They also told them get as far away from the building as possible. Remember, the 1993 attacks were in the basements. They knew where there was a chance of collapse, and I know you're going to say, so was this one. I don't want to get off into that. You know, that's another debate we can have another time, you know. That's a whole big, open, huge subject matter. But I know how I am. I would have more than likely been trying, as I think most Americans would be, to help. And many were killed doing just that. Who knows? That is fate or luck. The reaction was not fate or luck. The next 9 years have had nothing to do with fate or luck. It has everything to do with neo-ignorance. The next day I saw on KSL an interview with the head of the Saudi students. He said, we are all going home as soon as possible. There are reports that 5 students at Weber State had been detained and that the University of Utah 2 had been detained. You have to remember the Winter Olympics were only a few months away. I attended the Winter Olympic opening ceremonies with my daughter and sat right by Steve Garvey, who I watched play as a boy. The Ogden Dodgers, my town, we had AAA baseball in Ogden in the 60s. The Dodgers was sort of managed here when I was a boy. By the way, Don Zimmer managed the Salt Lake Gulls then. It was incredible baseball. Anyway, before I go into romance land, I never heard or read another word about the Saudi students. To this day, I do not see any Saudi students working in the labs. And that is where I am writing this. By the way, the first year the Saudi kids have came back has been this year. They're not in the labs, but they're back up. They're going to school. Ignorance and the blowjob set all the consequences into place. Not the attack, but the reaction, which has grown into as big as, if not bigger, than those horrible attacks. 3 Utahns were killed on that September 11th day attacks. Mary Alice Wallstrom, Carolyn Berg on Flight 11, more 11s. And Brady Howell at the Pentagon. I knew Brady Howell. He was a student at Weber. I would see him around the campus all the time. Mrs. Wallstrom, which many Utahns knew, a very sophisticated woman with charm, elegance, and grace, as class as it gets. I did not know Carolyn Berg. I have heard rumors for years that there was a polygamous family from central Utah on the top of the towers that day, and between 12 and 26 were killed. And the patriarch of the family refused any money or press coverage at all. I have tried to research it for this book, and the study I've got nowhere. It probably is not true, but I've been told that by some pretty credible, secret southern Utah polygamists. And let me tell you, if you don't know anything about those societies, they are so closed up. I've been working on it. I really have been told that by some pretty credible brains. But I don't know, one day. But the fact of the matter is we had not had a hijacking in this country for over 10 years. We were caught with our pants down. Name the place and the decade. Dozens of hijackings by radical Islamic terrorists and a couple others. They were going to fly the planes. Hijackings almost weekly. Name the country and the place and the decade. You got it. 1970s United States. We had hijackings weekly in those days. D.B. Cooper, a lot of people have said that he's Utah for many years. They would threaten to fly the planes into nuclear power plants. Remember, I wrote this before Fukushima, just a couple of months. And usually end up in Cuba. In 1968, Bobby Kennedy, who more than likely was going to be president, was killed by a Middle Eastern terrorist, Sirhan Sirhan, who was still alive in a California prison. By the way, I shook Bobby's hand at Weber up there in the Stewart gym. And 100 days before he was killed, just 4 days before he announced to the world that Martin Luther King was killed. And he patted me on the hand. I went with my uncle, and it really imprinted in my mind. It was a powerful day. I will never forget it. It impacted my life. I write a bunch about Bobby. I write a bunch of poetry in later chapters. This was not new. In 1993, some freaks tried the very towers. They are still in prison in New York. Their trials right in New York, just a block or two from the attempted crime. When Richard Freak, whatever his name, was the shoe creep, tried his crime to surely was no U.S. Marshal that got him. It was private citizens. The flight attendant jumped on him. 2 doctors sedated him. Americans are neo-ignorant. But the one thing Americans in knowledge are the best at in the world is reading isms. As I wrote about it earlier, they have to be. Back to the debt. The debt in our economy is a direct reaction to the manipulation of American popular opinion and Americans' pure ignorance. Even with the geographical Middle Eastern ignorance, without the blowjob we do not invade Iraq. The purest easy way to show the results and effect of this madness is the dollar. As a good derivative trader and futures trader, the strength of the dollar is my #1 trading tool. The dollar is to the euro as all I need, and I've been able for years to be extremely accurate in regard to the market. That's when I went on my rant last thing. That was the thing that triggered me. The markets were not melting down, as Kramer and everybody told you to go out, and I told you to go in. The day we invaded the dollar to the euro was 80 cents. We can literally draw a line from the dollar-euro ratio to the crushing of our wealth in the United States. In later chapters, I will draw out and show you in great detail the weighting of wealth and show you the 60 to 80% of all American wealth that has been lost over the past decade. That is a fact. I built a matrix, and I published it the first time in here. It's called the Kevin D. Blanch Weighted Wealth Matrix, and it works. In the late 90s, when the euro was being put into action, the European central banks would say, we hope to someday have the euro trading equal to the dollar, which I personally attended in the late 90s and listened to them say that personally. Who would have knew the euro would double its strength in less than a decade? If someone in the late 90s came to you and told me the following would happen within a few years. The great surplus was gone. We have $12 billion in debt. We have a 0% Fed interest rate. The NASDAQ 10 years later is trading at less than half without weighting. With weighting against oil, gold, or anything else, it is down 80%. The Dow is at the same level it was 10 years ago. The Dow weighted is off 60%. GM busted and delisted. The S&P 500 is down 20% without weighting. The S&P 500 is off 60% weighted against oil, gold, or anything else. Gold is $1,400 an ounce. Silver is $28 an ounce, US dollars. We have two wars going on that have had 30,000 US casualties. Who knows how many hundreds of thousands or millions of Iraqis. Our taxes are lower than they even in the 90s, or for that matter in 60 decades and decades, when we did have a surplus. Saddam had no weapons of mass destruction, and we hung him and ripped his head off. Ben Hu is still alive somewhere and did what? The technology revolution is over. Palm is no more. Yahoo's trading at what? The NASDAQ is at what? You know, I want to add one more thing. Apple's at trading at over 600. You know, $7 and all three. I could go on and on. If anyone said 1/10 of this, they would have had hauled me away to Bellevue. What? That chubby chick started all that? No way. Give this man a lobotomy fast. He's completely crazy. What? They did that Tom Clancy book we all read a few years ago? What? Greenspan's is basing all of these decisions on a science fiction novel by Ayn Rand? What? You say Tom Cruise is crazy? Who is crazy now? Put your brain back to 1999, and no, I do not mean Prince, although that is one cool song. Meditate, seriously meditate, and go back to 1999. It is easy for me. It is one of my happy places. The first half of the year, then it turned out to be my unhappiest time in my life. As I meditate, I go back to the summer of 1999. I was home back in West Weaver, living in my big, magnificent piece of artwork I had designed and built on 10 acres, full of original art from all over. A catwalk with Victorian carpet, 19-foot ceilings, a giant carved staircase, 2 giant mosaics, frescoes, built by my cousin Todd by hand, no pre-made anything, a chandelier from Italy, a chandelier made before electric, I know, that's what one is. Each room decorated in a different era, a very art deco round wall kitchen, 7,000 square feet of pure art. The outside, all rogue scroll Victorian stucco work I had spent years on. The house was white, red, and green with Victorian stained glass front windows. Blue herons, my favorite birds. They still are in West Weaver. I was freelance derivative trading, arbitrage hunting, and finding them, making money at everything I touched. The technology revolution in full flight. I had attended Comdex every year just to get a handle on what new products were coming to market by the month. I remember in 1998 November being at Comdex and seeing a television hanging off the wall. A flat screen, unheard of yet. Just getting started 10 years later. Today, it was a multi-appliance internet and television with one remote. I was positive everyone in America would have one within a few years. I write more about technology in future chapters, Shift F7, and all of the pain I went through in '99. Apple TV coming, that thing's coming soon, finally. But in the summer of 1999, as most of all of us in the 90s, the worst thing most Americans had to bitch about was their stock tip their cousin's uncle's cat groomer gave them, and they did not act on it, and he made $5 million. Remember, gas was $1.45 a gallon. Then just a few mad years later, start thinking of 03 or 4 or 5. How ugly that fast. The night before we invaded Iraq, I was watching Larry King, and he had George McGovern on. A well-decorated patriot and great humanitarian and politician. He said, if and when we go in, we will defeat Saddam very swiftly. But we will open a Pandora's box that may never be closed. I had been chirping the same thing for days. A few weeks later, I was at the truck stop near my house getting gas in what I would call the Biscuit, my old 1992 Buick that drove me to the track 80 miles away every day. You see, I was busted now, broke, my truck's gone, my house was gone, taken by thieves again. I had built it with cash, the stained glass ripped out and in a dumpster. I again will devote an entire chapter to ignorance in the art, in the lack thereof art, and the destruction of quality art over the last decade. As you know, there have been no art. We're the most art illiterate people in the history of the fucking world. I call it cover up $2 million worth of masonry with $5,000 worth of bad ethos. My big Victorian house, or they've destroyed Orwellian contemporized, turned into a piece of shit. I asked the guy one time, there was 2 grand, magnificent mosaics I did in there that took me 1,500 hours. So why'd you tear those mosaics out of there? You know what he said to me? What's a mosaic?